let's get to the actual revision of each
Yeah.
section. So the UCAT is 4 sections. Your verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, and SJT.
Yeah.
Now, let's put about 5 minutes for each section. How did you go about your revision, and what tips would you give to students that are sitting it? So let's go section by section.
Okay, verbal reasoning. First tip I'm going to give is going to be a bit of a controversial one, so I'll start off with that. And that's actually that you can use your prior knowledge or common sense on verbal reasoning to a certain extent, though. So everybody knows that you need to actually get the answer from the passage to be sure that it's right. However, you need to understand where these passages are coming from, right? They're coming from articles, they're coming from books, they're coming from people who actually know what they're talking about, right? They're not just getting random posts off the internet or something. So my point is that these articles are not going to contain false information, and you can actually use that to your advantage. So for example, on my exam, there was a question on like the Roman Empire, and it was a classic question: which of these 4 statements is true and supported by the passage, right? And I just knew from just my knowledge of history, I don't know where I picked it up, I don't know, from a book or something. I just knew that 3 of the statements were just clearly false and not true. So what I could do is I could just select the remaining one and move on, because the other 3 aren't going to appear in the passage. So this one must appear in the passage, right? Now that's a rare scenario, but where it comes in most useful is with actually guessing questions. Because most people, I think the stats are like 90% of people are going to have to guess at least one question on the verbal reasoning. So if you can improve your odds of getting that question right that you guess, that's going to be the difference between maybe 2 or 3 marks potentially, which is, around 40 to 50 points. So that's a big difference. So what I kind of recommend is to never blind guess a question. And what I mean by that is when you just essentially, yeah, exactly, just select, I don't know, B for all questions and just move on. I think you should always be at least reading the question and reading the answer options, because even if you don't have that kind of prior knowledge, you can at least use your common sense a lot of the time. I mean, some of the questions, some of the answer options just seem ridiculous a lot of the time, and they just seem completely out of tune with what you would expect on a normal UCAT passage. So any kind of super controversial sounding opinion or something that would be unlikely to appear in like a academic's view of a subject, you can probably just rule that out and move on.
It sounds like common sense, but what people need to understand is that when they're revising for the verbal reasoning, your main focus is genuinely just verbal reasoning. You don't even think about your common sense or like history or anything.
Yeah.
So it is quite a good tip to just be like, just read instead of just read it. Even if you're in a rush, just read what it says.
And yeah, it's not going to be able to guarantee you the mark. Like obviously, most of the time you should be reading the passage and actually finding the answer in the passage. But if it's a case where you've got 2 minutes left, you've got 12 questions to answer, instead of spending those 2 minutes on one passage and then just randomly guessing the last 8 questions, spend the 2 minutes on the 12 questions, actually give them a read and see which answer makes most sense to you. And in my experience, that's able to get your odds from like 25% per question up to maybe even 50% or something like that. I should do a test on that. I probably will in the future. But yeah, I think that can improve your odds massively. One thing I'll talk about, another thing with verbal reasoning, is of course everybody knows that ideally you should be scanning for keywords wherever possible, right? So you see a keyword in the question stem, you kind of look at the passage, identify it, and then you read the sentence before the keyword, the sentence containing the keyword, and the sentence after the keyword, right? And I think one kind of thing that people mess up with this is once they've identified the keyword, what they'll do is they'll still be in that kind of speed reading mode where they just rush through the 3 sentences. But verbal reasoning requires kind of a deep understanding of the passage. You can't just skim read all of it and expect to know the answer, right? You need to actually fully comprehend and digest what's going on. So once you have identified that keyword, actually take the time to slow down and fully understand what you're reading. So one tip I have is to actually sound out the word in your head. Now, a lot of people say don't do this, which of course, if you're just skim reading to kind of get a gist of the passage, of course, don't do that because it's going to make it a lot slower. But for some people, they need to do that to actually slow down and fully understand what they're actually reading. Another thing is, after each sentence, you could try recapping it in your head to make sure you fully digested it, you fully know what's going on, and it actually will cause it to stick in your brain. So when you go back to the question, you don't have to then go back to the passage again and reread it. So I'd say once you commit to reading the passage, actually read it properly. And then one final thing that I'll give for verbal reasoning is oftentimes you'll read the passage. You'll know that you've read the part of the passage that is meant to answer the question, but you're kind of stuck between two answers. Because the verbal reasoning, it's like once you understand the passage, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get the answer right. And I'm sure that people who do a lot of untimed practice, they probably know this, right? They know they've read the passage, they've read everything twice, and they're still getting questions wrong. Now, this isn't something you could avoid completely, but one kind of framework I kind of have for making that tricky decision between two options that seem right is not which option seems the most right, but instead which option has the weakest kind of counter argument against it. Because you need to realize that for each of the incorrect options, there's going to be something about it that makes it wrong. Either they add a new concept to the kind of statement, or they make an alteration from the passage that changes the meaning, or they make the wording more extreme than it actually is in the passage. So if you're stuck between two options, try making kind of a counter argument against each of them. And then that should kind of hopefully help you reveal which one is more likely to be incorrect. So that's just one final thing I'd say. And I'd say that once you've done that, you just need to kind of select one and move on. Don't dwell on those kind of questions for too long because they can be big time sucks.
I think that's like 3 very good tips, pretty much different sections that if they make notes on that, go through, it'll be very useful for them.